Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion on the future of sustainable mobility. I am Jessica Robinson. I'm a co-founder and partner at Assembly Ventures, where we invest in early-stage mobility startups. We have an office in Detroit, here in Michigan, and also in Berlin. And we see the future of mobility as the physical and digital movement of people, goods, data, and energy. And I think you'll see some of those themes come out in our discussion this afternoon. As an entrepreneur, I've actually been pretty busy. I also co-founded two other organizations focused on the mobility ecosystem and workforce training, the Detroit Mobility Lab and the Michigan Mobility Institute. Prior to that, I spent some time around the mobility ecosystem myself at a high-growth startup, working with startups in a global accelerator program, and then more recently at Ford, where I was part of the smart mobility team. But I think that's enough about me, because what we're here today is to talk about ideas. And the idea here is what it means to be both innovative and sustainable in both our ideas, our technologies, and our business practices. And I know, because I've had a chance to meet with all of them in advance, that you're going to hear some great ideas from our panelists today. And so, if I can leave you with one great idea myself, it would be this. And it's that frameworks are very important as we think about the opportunity for the future of sustainable mobility. So I want to start there. So we had a session earlier this morning looking at sustainability. And if you're like me, when you think about this topic, you usually start with the environmental aspect. And that's not a bad thing, but I would argue that's only one piece of the puzzle. So when I was asked to be part of this discussion today, I went for a framework of my own. And I found a paper written by several Italian researchers several years ago, and they propose an alternative definition for sustainable mobility. And I think, again, it provides a great framework here. And it starts actually from the idea of sustainable development, which is what you do today has an impact on the future. And so what we choose to do today should not jeopardize those that come before or come in the future. And so what I would argue is that translates into the definition of sustainable mobility. How might the choices we make today improve what we have today, improve what we have in the future, but also not set those up who come after us with extra work or, set behind the stage? And so with this idea of sustainable mobility, there's three elements that I want you to think about as a framework. And again, this is the structure of our discussion today. We can't talk about sustainability without talking about those environmental issues, of course. So these are things like emissions, reduction in greenhouse gases, but also things in our neighborhoods like noise. We have to talk about socioeconomic conditions as well, and this is where people come into this story. Things like equity and public involvement and safety. But we also have to talk about technological sustainability. We heard a little bit this morning about supply chain and materials, but I'd argue it goes further. It goes into alternative fuels, how we put technology in our cities, and as a business person and as an investor, I would argue we also have to think about sustainable business models, those that actually work for the long run, so we get out of a pilot cycle. And so, again, I'd encourage you all to apply this framework in your own minds as you meet our panelists this afternoon, depending on where you are. So I want to move to the panel. Sitting with me here on stage is Staci Kroon. Staci is president and CEO of BraunAbility. And now, Staci, before joining Braun, you spent a lot of time at Eaton, over 20 years in this industry. So I'm very excited to hear your perspective on the sustainable mobility future.
Great. Thanks, Jessica, and thanks for having me here today. I do want to talk about what we do at BraunAbility and how that impacts a sustainable future. And so, as Jessica mentioned, I think of the definition of sustainability as really, really broad. And when we think about sustainability, like in a corporate boardroom, of course, the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion is really prevalent there. So I think it's relevant that our conversation today around sustainability should include that. And in particular, what I want to focus on is a sometimes underrepresented community of those with physical disabilities. So you'll see here in this image a Chevy Traverse that BraunAbility has modified so that people like this gentleman, his name is Bruce Barnes, and he's an incredible man, but he's also a disabled veteran. And it allows him to have accessible transportation and independence. So our purpose at BraunAbility is to ensure folks like Bruce can live an independent life. Now, Bruce is fortunate enough to own his own adapted vehicle. But sustainable solutions should include not just consumer-owned vehicles, but public transportation, ride shares, and other ways, and other modes of transportation. We do supply solutions for that with specialty lifts, ramps, flooring, restraint solutions, and other ways to ensure that all modes of transportation are equitable today, and hopefully in the future as well. So it's our passion to make sure the next generation of vehicles and transportation solutions is even better for people like Bruce than the solutions we have for him today. So let's be sure tomorrow's solutions address the needs of these 24.6 million people whose situations limit their travel, many of whom don't leave home, many of whom are underemployed and have lower incomes than those who don't have these disabilities. And they travel much less than others. And why is that? Well, 70% less. Why? Because it's really difficult. And so some examples of things that need to be overcome when folks just try to go about what we might consider normal tasks, like going to work, going to school, getting to a doctor's appointment. Many individuals with personal disabilities can't transport themselves. They haven't had the joy of being able to drive, and so they rely on a caregiver to get them to their destination. So you don't have to coordinate one schedule, it's two. And sometimes folks need to use like a non-emergency medical transit to get to a doctor's appointment. Well, guess what? The windows for those transportation could be plus or minus 2 hours. So planning your day around something as simple as a visit to the doctor could be all they do in a given day. So we have an opportunity now to plan for what the future can look like to make life better for this group of folks. But here's the tricky part. There is no one technical solution that meets the needs of the whole group. So looking at the vehicles at the top, you can see that a wheelchair might be positioned in the middle or rear of the vehicle. That would be a great situation for a family, for example, with a child with mobility challenges. They may want to drive and have the ability to drive and get the ability to do that, or be a passenger with a regular caregiver or spouse, for example, who's the driver. So vehicle riding location could vary. The actual type of mobility device, and it could be a power wheelchair, a manual chair, a scooter, it could be a walker of some sort. All require different configurations. And then of course, just like the rest of us, vehicle type is so important. We've got an SUV here with a side entry, we've got a minivan with a rear entry, or even a pickup truck with a mobility chair seat that allows someone to get in and out. So just make sure that as we move to the future, that choice continues to be really important to accommodate this level of diversity. In order to do this, though, as people are developing vehicles now and new solutions now, I just really urge that we're talking about this group of people early and not late, because so much is dependent on vehicle design. And we can modify vehicles, but there are certain parameters that are just non-negotiable, some of which are law through the ADA. So let's start with getting into the vehicle. The step-in height of a vehicle, it has to be to the point that you can put a ramp in there, and you can see the current ADA requirements is 1 to 4, but practically we really need more 1 to 6. And as you put a battery in the floor of a vehicle, that gets increasingly more complicated to do that without an extremely long ramp. Your interior space needs to be large enough that a wheelchair can comfortably maneuver within there. And then door opening height. ADA requirements are 56-inch door opening height. And there's not a lot of vehicles that are designed with that type of door opening height, so it is something that we need to focus on as we design vehicles for the future. There we go. So just like everyone else, so we're watching this revolution in vehicles and all these new types of vehicles here being developed. And how many of these do you think have announced accessibility or contemplating accessibility in these new vehicle new vehicle platforms? The good news is quite a few, and so, but not all. So we've been fortunate at BraunAbility to work with many of them, and the ones I can talk about are like Navia and Local Motors that are outrunning pilots with these types of technologies with wheelchair accessibility associated with them. There's also a big investment through the DOT Inclusive Design Challenge with 10 teams with industry and academia who are developing innovative solutions to make autonomous vehicles more accessible for the future. So there's investment going on here. Much, much more is needed to really get it right for the future. Wheelchair transportation was really started by this man on your left. This man's Ralph Braun. He was the founder of our company. He's born with muscular dystrophy and designed at first a three-wheeler scooter and then a hydraulic lift that he put here in the back of a postal truck to enable his own transportation, and then ultimately wheelchair accessible vehicles as they're designed today. Really a pioneer that created an industry and created freedom and independence for an important group of people. It wasn't until 1990 that the ADA was signed, 31 years ago, but so grateful for that because it helped to ensure that these mobility solutions spread not just to individual car ownership, but to public transportation as well, and really, really spread the use of these technologies. But here we are sitting at a crossroads knowing that we've got autonomous vehicles, we've got self-driving, we've got EVs, and can we be confident that as those get deployed, that we have been part of creating the next generation of accessible transportation? I'm confident we can and look forward to the discussion.
Great, Staci, thank you so much. I really appreciated that presentation. And for those of you that know me, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. My father relies on assisted transportation, so spot on in terms of the need. I mentioned that Italian paper earlier. One of the interesting things to me as I reread it was that they called out another form of technology enabling a sustainable future for mobility. It was teleworking. So we actually have several panel participants today leveraging that mobility technology and joining us as video participants. So I'd like to introduce our next panelist. He's Steve Hornyak. Steve is the Chief Revenue Officer for BrightDrop. And Steve has a wide range of experience commercializing a whole host of technologies, including AI, robotic fulfillment centers, and software. So Steve, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're up to with BrightDrop.
Absolutely. I think really focusing on BrightDrop and what we're doing out there today. And make sure I can control the slides here. There we go. So as y'all know, the demand for e-commerce is absolutely exploding. In fact, the market for e-commerce has grown over 27% year over year and 300% over the last 5 years. And the pandemic has just absolutely fueled this fire of growth. In fact, a lot of people are saying, and the statement I say a lot, is it's put us in a time machine. So it's actually put us in a time machine and thrust us 5 years into the future. Now, complicating that on top of this massive demand for e-commerce is that society has moved to a click and have to have it now mentality. So everyone is out there, and as opposed to going shopping as much, it's a click and have it now. So what has that done? That's led to a massive demand on first and last mile from a fulfillment and delivery perspective, and actually first and last 100,000 yards in addition to first and last mile for package delivery. That results in congestion and additional tailpipe emissions that are happening out there today. Complicating this matter is that demands are being placed on companies to reduce tailpipe emissions, become carbon neutral, and there is an increasing impatience on congestion in cities. So that's where BrightDrop fits in. We're a new business reimagining commercial delivery and logistics for an all-electric future, smarter and more efficient ways to deliver goods and services. So we are creating, in fact, we've already delivered the first components of creating a true ecosystem of an all-electric first or last mile solution, from electrically propelled containers to electric vehicles, software, and services. It's going to allow logistics and delivery companies to be much more efficient, drive down costs, and reduce vehicle emissions. So if you don't know, BrightDrop is backed by and supported by General Motors. But as an independent company, we're allowed to move at the speed of a startup with the stability of a global mature engineering and manufacturing company. So let me kind of introduce our first several products that we brought to market. And again, we just announced the company has been working, I'll say, in stealth mode for a number of years in the innovation labs at General Motors. It was brought out by Mary just this year in January. The company was announced, and we are accelerating into execution mode very, very quickly. So the EP1 is one of our first products released. And EP1, think of it as an electrically propelled container developed to move goods over short distances. So kind of think of it as a last 100-yard solution versus the last mile solution. So as opposed to carriers having to use trolleys, backup, et cetera, it allowed them to much more comfortably get goods to people, particularly in congested areas. It also is secured. So it allows for remote access, remote entry, and we can track these devices. So they're very, very smart. So put into practice, let me give you a practical example. So driving around major cities, you look around, heavily congested, lots of trucks sitting on the side of the road, packages coming out the back, people running up, delivering them, engines idling, emissions coming out. So imagine next generation where a truck came up and EP1s came out of that truck, were set in the sidelines, truck pulled away, reducing the congestion, reducing your idle time on the streets by over 90%. That's what we've seen in our tests. Now, you have a more efficient way of delivering packages. And in fact, with our initial test with FedEx, we saw a 25% increase in the number of packages that individuals were able to deliver in congested areas by leveraging the EP1 versus the traditional manual way, 25%. That's massive increase, particularly when you know that there's over 100 million packages being delivered, each and every day. So next, and not to say least, but the BrightDrop EV600. That's our first electric vehicle that we have. In fact, the vehicle you will see it highlighted during the PGA event at St. Jude's. In fact, I'm in Memphis right now. And you please, if you watch that event, look out for some really creative and interesting commercials and promotions that FedEx will be doing about what they are doing for an all-electric future. So the EV600, built from the ground up, guys, 100% ground up, not a retrofit, purpose-built for last mile delivery. It's based on the GM Ultium platform, and it's targeted to have an estimated range of 250 miles upon full charge. And it's leveraging all of the GM safety features out there. So that's one of the benefits of all this advanced technology that you have out there today. I lost my speaker. Sorry about that. I should be back with my microphone. Sorry about that. And we estimate that the EV600 will save companies that deploy it about $7,000 a year in operating expenses. So not only is it great for the environment, but it's great for the bottom line as well. And FedEx is our launch customer and launch partner with the EV600, and the first production vehicles are coming off the lines as we speak and will be delivered to FedEx before the end of the year. So from announcement of new company to delivery of our first production vehicles, we'll be doing that within the same calendar year. So the company is moving absolutely lightning fast. And last, we're an ecosystem, we're a platform company. So these vehicles, if you think about it, they're rolling supercomputers, whether it be BEP, the electrically powered propulsion cart, or the EVs that are out there, whether it's a 600 or derivative version of that as we move forward, they're rolling supercomputers, and they're creating a ton of data. So BrightDrop is creating a platform and ecosystem that leverages all that data in order to radically increase the speed to our ROI and increase the efficiency and effectiveness of these systems as they move forward in collaboration with these with these vehicles being produced. So really, BrightDrop as a company is it's a new kind of business. It's designed from the ground up. It's focusing on zero emissions, zero congestion, and zero crashes.
That's great. Thank you so much, Steve. I want to introduce you to our next virtual participant, Mark Kopko. Mark is joining us from Pennsylvania, where he is the director for the Office of Transformational Technology for the Pennsylvania DOT, which I will call PennDOT from here on out. Mark has been there for 11 years and taken on a variety of increasing, interesting and challenging roles, including this new one focused on innovation. So Mark, could you tell us a little bit more about what you are up to at PennDOT?
Sure. Make sure I got the slides here. Good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Mark Kopko, and I am the director of our Office of Transformational Technology at PennDOT. So transformational technology definitely sounds like a fancier name than what it probably should be, but I look at emerging technology. So my job in the department is to look at things that are 5, 10, 15 years plus out and make sure that we are positioned appropriately as a department to address this technology. So it's always important to start off with an understanding of PennDOT. And so we have some numbers here, as most states would have, but to give you an idea, Pennsylvania is the 5th largest state, a little over 13 million citizens. So we have about 120,000 miles of roadway. Of that, about 40,000 miles are controlled by PennDOT. We have a little over 25,000 bridges. We supervise 53 transit systems, oversee 65 operating rail lines. We have a construction budget of close to $2 billion a year. We oversee public use of airports. We have 3 ports within the Commonwealth. We have approximately 12 million vehicles across 10 million drivers, 103 billion annual vehicle miles traveled a year, and 2,440 miles of bicycle routes within Pennsylvania. So as we start talking about sustainability, it's important from a infrastructure owner operator, from a public policy standpoint, to understand what type of environment you're working with. And when you have an environment that diverse and that large, you understand the importance of sustainability working towards this. And we look at it from a variety of lenses. Of course, you have accessibility, making sure that we try and find those that have been left out in the past and make sure that we have a pathway from the go forward in the future, trying to hit these areas where we don't have the services right now, and how can we use this technology to supplement and enhance existing services. Now, not necessarily replace. We think that the ultimate goal is, as you start to integrate, especially things like automation, you should see an uptick in our existing services, such as public transit. We want to look at things from an equity lens, making sure that we take into account all citizens in all areas. So, regardless of race or gender, we want to make sure that we have that understanding. We try to make sure we have diversity from all of our stakeholder groups and participation from that standpoint. And also, Pennsylvania's a unique state from some in the Northeast, in the fact that the vast majority of our 67 counties are rural. Of course, we have our 2 major metropolitan areas of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but there's a lot of rural in between. We try to look at things from a green standpoint, knowing that electrification and other alternate fuel sources is important to make sure this ties into our overall mission within the department. But probably 2 of the areas that we think are most important is looking at the community involvement for sustainability and interoperability. It's important, we feel, to engage the community and engage all stakeholders up front as we start working on public policy initiatives, working towards emerging technology, and try and incorporate their opinions and their concerns right up front. And also looking at interoperability. We tend to focus a lot on just our particular roadway network, but citizens don't look at it that way. So we want to make sure that we have systems in place that, regardless of where someone's operating from or where they're actually going to, we have that consistency, that interoperability. It's also important then within different sources. So in areas like Pittsburgh right now, we are looking at things like personal delivery devices interacting with micromobility, which is interacting with traditional fleets, which is interacting with on-road automated vehicle testing. So we are trying to look at it from a variety of aspects to make sure that what we have here is actually sustainable, because you have these variety of modes, and it's important that they have that communication and that coordination as they're rolled out. So the way that we try and approach this is start from an initial planning approach. So looking at a variety of different aspects. So from our research initiatives to our coordination, our industry standards, our communications with all the stakeholders, we try to group them all into one area, and from that come up with a comprehensive strategic roadmap. So this will establish the statewide consistency, and then we can work with the municipalities. So we have 2,560 individual municipalities within Pennsylvania, work with the sister state agencies. to make sure that ties in with our green initiatives and our other mobility initiatives, and tie in with our planning partners so that we can make sure that everything's brought into the light early on. So whether it be trying to make sure that EV, it's not just getting a fleet turnover in a certain size, but making sure that we have charging stations in the right place. So you can count for mobility, you can count for things like disaster situations where you have flooding or you have hurricane evacuation into the state. How do you make sure that we have automated vehicles safely testing on our roadways, and they account and have considerations in the future for people to have a variety of accessible means? So with that, I very much look forward to the conversation here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mark. It sounds like you have a simple and straightforward job. So look forward to talking more about that with our Q&A. Last panelist, and then we will move into a discussion here, is Ross McKenzie. Ross is the managing director for a program called WatCAR at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. So we have international telecommuting as well this morning. Ross, it's good to see you. And please tell us a little bit more about what you are working on at WatCAR.
Thanks very much, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon here and have the opportunity to participate in the panel today. The challenge here for a sustainable future as it relates to mobility solutions, I believe, comes down to 5 key areas. 5 things that we have to have in order to realize mobility solutions sustainably. Obviously, things need to be renewable, and we've got to look beyond batteries. It's not just a question of moving from combustion to electric propulsion, but in the medium term, fuel cells are going to play a role, I do believe. Infrastructure for refueling with hydrogen remains as the biggest obstacle. But also, as was mentioned this morning in Swami Kotagiri's opening keynote, we have a challenge with the harvesting and mining of the resources, the rare earth minerals required to make those batteries for the EVs that are on the way from numerous OEMs. And how do we manage that and factor that in and weight it against the sustainable aspects of electric propulsion? Any mobility solution is going to need to be intelligent. As we are on the verge of ubiquitous 5G communication capabilities, it's not enough to just talk about advancing connected intelligent transportation systems. You've got to have intelligence in real time, utilizing AI to make safe, reasoned decisions and ensure that the response, whether it's with a direction given or an automated vehicle's driving command instruction taken, is safe and in the best interest of the infrastructure as a whole. Everybody, whether it's the pedestrians on the street, the vehicles on the road, or in the case of BrightDrop, the delivery caravan with packages that could be going alongside you on the sidewalk. It's got to be affordable. You need to have affordability not only in an urban environment for fleet deployments and delivery, but also affordability for consumers who are predominantly in the suburbs and may or may not be coming into the urban areas as frequently as traditional we think of with respect to coming out of the pandemic and how work patterns and work from locations are going to shift. Durability is key. We have a long life expectancy amongst the vehicle fleet in the driveways of North America, typically about 10 years plus. And new technologies, are they sustainable for a duration of a decade? We have to factor in weather. We have to factor in the ability to do over-the-air updates and to keep pace with the advancements in technology that are coming at a rapid, continuous pace. And finally, I believe we need to have an anxiety-free process beyond just range anxiety of charging vehicles and how far you can go, but getting into the personal space of your individual application. Is it easy to use? Are you nervous because it's an electric vehicle versus what you're traditionally used to in a combustion, and the ability to transition from one to the other? And by extension, ease of use in that same space. In order to achieve this, we're going to have an unconventional approach. That will be the watchword. 3 things are required. We need a connected infrastructure, but more than just V to I or V to V, it's now vehicle to everything. We're going to see automated vehicles, initial advancements through ADAS, communications, utilizing that 5G connectivity, and a little bit of machine learning along the way as well with artificial intelligence. But the third piece, high definition maps. More than just path planning, we need real-time traffic monitoring that's reliable. We need to incorporate pedestrian behavior prediction. Ultimately, the continued convergence is going to be technology driven, whether it's through advancements in solid state LiDAR, where green meets intelligence. We are going to realize uniformity through OEMs and tier 1s, but also from players on the technology side. And we are in a situation where industry can only go so deep, whether it's through a lack of time, a shortage of qualified available personnel, the rapid, or as was said in one of the power lunches earlier today, the exponential advancements of technology. Academia is positioned to help fill this void. Today, I believe more than ever, academia goes deep on a wide range of tech. And what we need to achieve market-ready mobility solutions for a sustainable future. They may be unconventional, however, the process to get there we've cycled through before, and it is familiar. The only constant going forward will be change. Jessica, back to you.
Thank you, Ross. And I really appreciated that you proposed a framework of your own and the concept of renewability, intelligent solutions, affordability, durability, and anxiety-free offerings as well. I'm going to actually use that as a springboard for the rest of our conversation in the sense that, as you can see, we have a wide range of expertise on various aspects of what the future of sustainable mobility looks like. So I want to distill it down quickly, and then we will start to go deep again. So Ross, you proposed those 5 words. I'm going to ask the rest of the group, and feel free to jump in, or I'll call on folks individually so that we don't have chaos here. I'd love 2 words. Staci, maybe we'll start with you since you're here with me. 2 words that, when you think about the future of mobility, what are those 2 words for you? Maybe one that's obvious and core to your mission, and maybe something that's surprising.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. So I actually, let me start with the first one, which is really choice, right? So, we have the opportunity to give people options in an even broader way than we have them today, and all of those options should be affordable. So I really liked that Ross brought that up. We've got a real opportunity to bring affordability into the equation, and candidly, it's something I'm pretty concerned about as we think about the more complex vehicles today, and at least for the space that I am focused on, we aren't moving in the right direction there. So I do think a pivot there is warranted and important.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Steve.
2 words, I would say infrastructure and data. So particularly as it comes to the commercial area, infrastructure is going to be critical in the United States. Yeah, we'll hit our head on the amount of electricity that will be needed to drive yards with dozens, if not hundreds of vehicles, electrically powered vehicles in the future. So infrastructure is going to be one of the key areas. Data is the other one. There's going to be a massive leveraging of data in order to optimize the entire fleet of electrically powered vehicles for last mile goods delivered.
That's great. Thanks, Steve. Mark, how about you?
I would go with inclusive to start, just knowing that we have to bring in a variety of groups to have them as part of the conversation to begin with, and make sure that any solution works for everyone. and also agile. I think if there's one thing that we've learned over the years is that technology is going to change in ways that you've never foreseen in the beginning. So making sure that you have an agile approach where you can pivot and adjust accordingly so that you're not wasting investments, you're not sacrificing anyone's accessibility or anyone's access. You can start to have a approach that works for everyone and can adjust accordingly in the future.
That's great. And then, Ross, do you have any other words that you want to introduce? You did a good job teeing us off here.
I just bring it back to how I summarized those 5. Ultimately, going forward, it's going to be unconventional. When you're thinking of mobility solutions and the different types of offerings, the varieties that are needed, as was outlined in Staci's presentation, it's not what you expect, and how we get there is going to be unconventional.
Mm-hmm. That's great, thank you. Mark, I want to come back to you with this idea of unconventionality and being agile as well. Maybe those 2 words are not often thought of in the context of government, civil engineering, infrastructure. Yet you have an amazing title and a very broad remit in terms of the things that you're working on at PennDOT. So I'm curious if you could maybe talk more about how you balance this world of keeping the roads in good shape and the lights on, as they say, while thinking about this next 10 and 15 years out. How does Agile play out in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, certainly. And, anyone who lives in the northern hemisphere knows that you're always going to have potholes, you're always going to have roads to pave, bridges to repair. So there's plenty that's on our plate already, so how do you balance that? So, we had an understanding early on that when we start looking at infrastructure, we're designing these roadways for lifespans of decades. We start looking at a lot of our traffic signals within Pennsylvania, about 14,000 traffic signals. Although there's adjustments to it, most of the time you don't have a complete reconstruction for about 20 to 30 years. So the best approach we try to take is trying to come up with what is foundational changes we can make that sets the right groundwork for this technology in the future, so that regardless of where things go, we can make their appropriate adjustments later on, but we have things in place now that can help, and put things in place that help from day one. So a perfect example would be fiber communication. So a fiber backbone, broadband in place, clear use cases from not only an operational standpoint of tying in operational equipment out on the road, message boards, tying in different facilities, just giving a better situational awareness, but you're going to need that type of equipment in the future then for things like connectivity, or potentially uses for automation, or tying back into other type of smart city applications. So what we view as the most important thing is to try and figure out what type of investments we can do right now that gives us a leg up, that there's still a use case. So regardless of whether or not it comes to fruition, because at the end of the day, we're using still taxpayer dollars, we want to make sure that there's still a day one benefit. And there's still plenty of work to be done. So if we can start to tie together the future and the present, and you find that commonality, it sets you in the right direction.
That's great, thank you. I want to come to Steve, you next, and draw a little bit more on this idea of infrastructure. It's something that you and Mark share in common here, having, again, you mentioned that as one of your key words. BrightDrop recently announced a new pilot, if you will, in Seattle, right, where you have the service, but there's some other partners as well, and it's in what some of us might think of as a parking lot. But you've got place and infrastructure and vehicles coming together. Can you talk more about how this plays out for you at BrightDrop, where you're dealing with engineering all the way through software while trying to get in business and start to generate revenue? It's also not a easy or simple thing to get off the ground.
No, absolutely. And I think there's 2 different types of infrastructure. The infrastructure I was actually referring to is the electric infrastructure for charging.
Sure.
So you run into a brick wall at about 20 to 30 vehicles needing to be charged simultaneously without needing to put in a new substation. And substations take time and money, as you know. So the U.S. is lagging Europe with respect to proactively putting infrastructure in, and the market is incredibly bifurcated with a number of different jurisdictions and who owns the electricity and the local people that are responsible for deploying it. So we, BrightDrop is actually, we formed a number of partnerships to help facilitate and accelerate that form of infrastructure for our customers. The other infrastructure framed up there, and that was Reef, was one of our partners up there, as well as Axel Hire and a few others, where we're looking at using bicycles as for the last mile. And I would say not even last mile, but the last several hundred yards for hyperdense areas, where our electrically propelled lockable container would be driven straight onto the back of bicycles and then taken from there straight to delivery, and allow it to be secured and allow for more cold chain control, and allow for a more automated distribution mechanism versus the manual tote bag strapped with bungee cords. I'm exaggerating a bit that they're using today. But in any complex solution, there's always going to be a collaboration of multiple people, particularly in the early adopter mode, to pull together a whole product. And we are absolutely focused on that and ensuring that we can bring a whole product to customers in the future, whether it be from a electrical charging infrastructure perspective, or whether it be from the partners required in order to provide that whole product to the ultimate end customer.
That's great, thank you. And part of the reason I started with both of you is at Assembly, we have another framework that we use to look at the mobility space. And Carla introduced one of her own acronyms this morning. I'll share ours with you. We look at 3 layers: infrastructure, systems, and applications. And so we call it ISA. But this idea that you have to start with place and that built environment and the infrastructures. If you are inventing the future of mobility and you ignore those things, I would say that's to our own peril. Ross, I want to come to you next, maybe with this idea of systems, because WatCAR is a bit of a platform yourself in the sense that you bring together different partners. How are you seeing some of the themes that our other panelists have introduced play out in terms of the actual research that folks at the university want to do, as well as within the business community?
We're seeing a lot more efforts in a collective approach. Again, this was touched on this morning in a couple of different sessions. It was referred to in one instance as co-development. So previously, where we may have partnered just with an OEM and done some good work in advancing research in one specific area relating to lightweighting, for example. Now that's a co-development exercise with the materials supplier, the tier 1, as well as the OEM. And going forward with the rapid pace of the technological advancements that we're seeing, I think where academia is adjusting and needs to continue to adjust, it's not all about the traditional 18-month plus research collaborative approach, a project that can contribute to bringing in a grad student or two and contributing towards their thesis. That's still the mainstay of what we do collectively, I think, in North American academia, our bread and butter, if you will. But to be more responsive, and we're seeing more and more of this, where perhaps the need from industry doesn't require a professor with a team under that professor. It could just be a postdoc within a lab of a certain expertise, and that can contribute and become an embedded part of a co-development project alongside 2 or 3 other partners. There's also opportunities at the undergraduate level with placements and graduate student internships as well. So a little bit of a widening of the variety of offerings that academia can present to help engage in real time and more rapidly than I think we're traditionally perceived to look towards as engagement partners.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. And Staci, I want to throw the last question to you. You'll notice in the infrastructure system application framework, there were no people discussed. But we obviously can't have mobility or mobility services if we don't think about the user and all of the choices that we want as we move around in the world. I assume that BraunAbility, I mean, you put that front and center. Can you talk more about maybe how you do that discovery and making sure that as you design for all of these vehicle constraints, the height and the distance on the ramp, how do you balance that with what someone actually needs?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is there was a phrase that was used right before the passing of the ADA by the disability community that said, "Nothing about us without us." And it may sound familiar to you, and that's what we live by. So all of our vehicle design and development, of course, incorporates the focus groups or whatever we need to do to be sure that the individual who is going to be either riding or driving that vehicle is in there. But yeah, it brings up some technical challenges because, as I mentioned before, some of the things that are really practical in terms of the use of the vehicle are really engineering challenges, particularly as vehicle designs are changing so rapidly right now, and generally not getting bigger, generally getting smaller in terms of the interior space. So, but it's really interesting when you watch someone in a wheelchair maneuver into a vehicle, and you see all sorts of things we don't think about. I mean, I mentioned the ramp angle, and we had one of our engineers using a manual chair to get into the vehicle, and this was way better than ADA compliant, a much less steep than ADA compliant, and was head of our engineering and operations, and actually flipped over and hit himself and fell on the back of his head. And so compliance isn't necessarily good enough in terms of the practical application and how people use it. And what's interesting, when we do focus groups, and you'd have someone who's a regular wheelchair user go up a similar ramp and really work at it. Like, it could be an arm workout to get up one of these ramps, and then you say at the end, okay, give me a score of 1 to 5. How was that experience for you? They're like, it was a 5. You go, how could that be a 5? They go, because all the others are much worse. Mm-hmm. And so it's really the standard that's out there. When you talk about people, there's a big difference between compliance and what's right and what's really needed.
That's great.
While we're on this up, can I jump in on infrastructure?
Please,
because there's a piece of infrastructure that I want to bring up too, and there's 2 pieces of infrastructure that I think we've really got that are important to the future. One is parking, and 2 is curb cuts. So, it's one of the biggest complaints of wheelchair users of parking. The number of spots is often concerned, but more importantly, the incorrect use of the access aisle. And so individuals with wheelchair accessible vehicles, it's not unusual to get actually trapped outside of your vehicle with no ability to deploy the ramp because someone has parked in the space that's designated for that. And so, as we think about the future and how to be sustainable and how to kind of solve these problems for the future, there's an infrastructure opportunity for us there. Mm-hmm. And then also just curb cuts, right? I mean, how many and where are those locations? And when we think about public transportation, oftentimes the curb cut is nowhere near where the bus actually comes to pick someone up. So thinking about all that with the infrastructure is another, I think, part of the voice going forward.
Those are great additions. I actually was just at a shopping center earlier this week and noticed their ADA spot, they had spun around in the parking lot and took multiple spaces to have room for that exit, the ramp in the rear, which you normally wouldn't want going into that vehicle traffic. So I think slowly we're starting to see that design take hold.
But we don't have a standard.
Yes.
We don't have a standard across a state, a country, and so I think there's an opportunity to standardize that so that we can get better, because people are having to make those decisions for what have they seen, what do they think is best. We really need a standard.
Yeah, that's actually a great addition, I think, to this discussion of frameworks too, in the sense that, we can have these goals, but until they become codified or aligned, it's kind of everyone pushing things forward on their own, but standards really let us collectively say, this is what we prioritize and this is what we're going to move forward. So I think that's a great addition. I want to open this question of inclusivity and equity to our virtual participants as well, in the sense that I suspect that your organizations have also started to prioritize some of these areas. And I'm curious, maybe not so much the principles, but take for granted that maybe you're moving in this direction, but what have you learned about actually trying to put these principles into action? Is there an example or story like Staci had in terms of being with someone and saying, wow, we did not understand that before, but we do now because of who participated in that design process? Does anyone feel compelled to jump in on that one?
I could just cite a personal example as well from experience, not in being involved, but working with one of our faculty members in engineering here at Waterloo, who is mobility challenged, confined to a wheelchair, and ironically has a BraunAbility van. As a new building went up and the location of his workspace shifted, he needed to be accommodated for parking and had a side ramp access issue to be addressed. And it was a case-by-case scenario that our parking services people took to accommodate him, and his parking spot was assigned in addition to the handicap spaces that are required under the minimums that Staci's talked about, which are often not enough. And the space that he was assigned was at the end of the row, and it was where there was not a lot of vehicle traffic, so it could accommodate the ramp coming out, and special signage was added. So until we get those standards in place or more common design elements, I think case by case, at least from that one example here at Waterloo, is a good interim solution.
Great, thank you. And I will point out that we have a few minutes left. There is still a chance to submit your questions, whether you're here in the room or joining us online. So take advantage of that Q&A section of the event app. I'm going to throw a question open again to anybody in the group, shifting the conversation a little bit to the idea of how we move from aspiration into action. I think every one of you've talked about partnership. Either you've used the word, or the examples that you've shared really drew out that your organization alone couldn't have brought a particular innovation to life. But my question around partnership is, what's something that you wish your partner who was in a different sector, maybe you sit in the public sector and you were working with a startup, or you're a startup working with a big corporate, what's something that you wish that partner on the other side of the table knew about you or your priorities or the stakeholder group that you worked with in advance? And I ask this question because I'm biased, but I believe the way forward is through partnerships. And increasingly, we're going to see these joint business development deals between corporates. We're going to see startups playing an important role. We're going to see the community demand a stronger voice in designing mobility systems of the future. So maybe there's some lessons learned. Anyone want to start with that one?
I'll go ahead and jump in on that. I think it's interesting to see, for myself being a serial entrepreneur and technology executive and a Form 4 officer in multiple public companies, and then all of a sudden land at BrightDrop, which is, with the parent company being General Motors, just radically different for me, but equally challenging. And I think part of the process from our perspective is with folks that have been used to this long 10-year cycle of vehicles, and the precision by which decisions need to be made, and the speed by which decisions need to be made is radically different than in a next generation entrepreneurial, aggressive growth startup company. So part of it is educating them that it's okay to fail, just fail quickly, and learn from that and pick up and move forward. And the other one is the sense of urgency. So the sense of urgency, moving quickly and grabbing market share and grabbing attention out there, and possibly even going forward, leaning in forward with customers in a more, I'll call it aggressive manner than is typically done with larger, more established, mature companies. It's okay. And teaching people to get out of their comfort zone and their comfort bubble has been a quite interesting exercise for me over the last couple of months. But you will find that people are very responsive to it once they understand the benefits of it, once they're educated in it, and once they experience it once or twice.
Great, thank you. Who else? What do you wish that partner across the table knew about you before you sat down?
I'll add to that flexibility. Before going into a discussion, if industry could appreciate that academia is far more flexible than they may believe, and by extension, not come to academia with a single problem or issue that they want help to solve. We need research done on this. But more broadly, engage us in a conversation that talks about the solution that you're targeting and the challenges you're facing to get there, a subset of which is this problem that we think you can help us with to do research. Because there could be broader capabilities or other options. And academia is, if it's worth its salt on research, far more flexible than I believe industry believes.
Mm-hmm. So getting a little bit out of the prescriptive problem and solution approach.
Precisely.
I like the flexible, and I think along with that, experience we'd have is just early, right? So the earlier we get in these dialogues, the more solutions that we can apply. And it goes back to the flexible, right? If it's at the very end of a vehicle design and hey, how do we make this ADA accessible? Well, we could do these things, but your vehicle would be much more optimal if we had talked about it a couple stages earlier in your development process, and we could accomplish, your primary function of the vehicle as well as this. So we can be flexible too, but it's got to be a little bit earlier in the process so that we can really engage in the broader options.
Yeah, I think sometimes too that manifests in a hesitancy to sit down before you have all the answers. Yeah. And that's part of this flexibility and this early timing piece too.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd like to add on to that. So from a government standpoint, I guess it's two things. So tying on to that flexibility would be patience with government, frankly. At the end of the day, a lot of people just don't understand the limitations that government has with procurement and partnerships under laws and regulations, and just having that ability to try and work a partnership into place, it takes time, unfortunately. I think the other part that we would like to have a better understanding of for people when you meet with us is just that when we ask a question, we're being genuine. We found that early on with a lot of our conversations with startups and emerging technology industries is that there always seemed to be that thought that when we asked a question, there was some sort of ulterior motive, and it's not the case. When we ask a question, we're frankly just want to get to that. We're not trying to go in a gotcha type of moment here where we want to work together. We understand the only way you want to see this technology succeed, and we start to see benefits in the future from a mobility, from sustainability, from a variety of aspects, is you need to have that public-private partnerships. You need to work with academia. You need to work with industry. You need to work with a variety of folks. So, for us to have that level of comfort and understanding each other, that's the most important thing, to build that rapport right off the bat. And then from that, we can start to do some interesting things.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. And what's interesting to me about that is some of those concepts, what we wish we knew about each other, they're in tension, right? How do you be patient while simultaneously moving quickly? That tension may exist forever, but I think, again, having the dialogue around here's where I'm coming from starts a productive conversation there. So we have about a minute left. I can't believe our time is already up. So I want to stick with this idea of partners and stakeholders for one more minute as we close out this session. Mark, I'm going to come to you first. And the question is a simple one. As you go about your work, what stakeholder group, entity, any party in the mobility ecosystem that comes to mind would you most like to connect with right now, given the work that you're doing?
Honestly, the general public, and that's the hardest one. It's the group that's impacted the most, but because there's just so many individuals, finding a mechanism to properly engage without going through associations or larger groups, it's a challenge for all government entities. So, that's the stakeholder group that we most want to get engaged with, because that's how you start to understand, through the discussion about How do you make sure you have that inclusivity? Make sure you have the right folks at the table before you have any discussions that impact them. It's just a challenge when you have just sheer size.
Yeah, that's a great one. Steve, who would you most like to connect with these days?
I'll be a broken record. I'll say the electric infrastructure and getting them to be able to understand that they've got to move faster in order for folks like us, like BrightDrop, to be able to execute to these zero emissions that are being demanded today in society.
Okay, great. Ross?
I'd most like to connect with the IT community and the automotive/mobility community simultaneously, because there's advances in technology on both sides that the other would benefit from knowing about, that would drive the entire co-development process further forward if there was a little more openness and transparency other than through acquisition. And there's opportunities there, as Mark said, to engage with public-private partnerships and academia as part of that as well.
That's great. Thank you. And Staci?
Yeah, I think probably standard setting agencies, because the ADA is 31 years old. It's made great progress, but as a society, we've progressed beyond some of that. So I think standard setting would be really important for us as we move forward.
That's great. So now everybody, your wish lists are out there. You know who wants to chat with whom. But I asked that question because the sustainable mobility future is about relationships too. And while technology projects and deployments are hectic, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we are all working on this together, and I hope some new connections will come out of this discussion as well. And so with that, thank you all for joining. Thanks for our virtual participants as well. And Staci, thanks for joining me here on stage.